Hi guys, Mr. Davis here. This is the fourth and final lesson of our work on the neuromuscular system. I asked you to complete a couple of tasks at the end of last lesson, but before we get to that, I just want to do a little knowledge recall work. Again, jumping back to some content that we looked at in the cardiovascular system, and this concerns the vascular shunt mechanism. If you can take a look at this question. I've put 5 marks down and I want you to comment on 5 particular things now. Just in case you're a little rusty, I've given you a few tips here. If you can see through the 5 bullet points there, the last one, there's actually 2 separate things attached to it. Hopefully that rings a few bells for you. If you can give yourself 5 to 10 minutes to complete this task, pause the video here and I will pick it up in a minute once you've got the work done. Okay, good luck. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that we're looking for. I'm just going to run through it quickly and then you can purple pen your own work and where necessary, either redraft or edit and adapt accordingly. So the first thing that you need to be noting down for this sort of question, I'll just read through the question. So explain how vascular shunting is achieved during exercise. So how does it work when you're exercising? And there's 5 different things I want you to put down here. The first one is always about kind of what the source of the issue is. So in this question, you're commenting on the fact that chemoreceptors and proprioceptors are working to send those messages back to the brain. So what is it that chemoreceptors are actually detecting? Thank you. So it's chemical changes there. What are they? What sort of chemical changes would they be picking up? Yep, so changes to carbon dioxide levels, changes to blood acidity and pH levels, potentially lactic acid, anything like that. The chemoreceptors will pick that up in the blood. Proprioceptors, what's their role? Yep, so proprioceptors all to do with movement, so they're going to be detecting changes in muscle length, changes in movement that are occurring, obviously during exercise. Those messages are then sent to the VCC. What is the VCC? Okay, so you might need to check back through your notes. The VCC is the vasomotor control center. So that's in the brain. That's where those messages are going to be sent. And then from there, action can be taken. So the next bullet point you're looking for is those increase in impulses by the sympathetic nervous system. So remember, during exercise, everything needs to speed up a little bit, and it's a sympathetic nervous system that's going to help you achieve that. So increases in things like heart rate to get more blood and more oxygen circulating around the body to the working muscles. That's achieved through getting those messages via the sympathetic nervous system. And then we come on to the 2 kind of the key aspects for vascular shunting. The first one is to do with precapillary sphincters. So the precapillary sphincters, just before they get into the main part of the muscle at the end of the blood vessels, what they do is they will contract, so they will narrow in their diameter, reducing the blood flow to the non-essential organs. So more blood is going to be required to get to the working muscles, and therefore less blood is going to need to be sent to those non-essential organs. The second part of this process is to do with vasodilation and vasoconstriction, so redistributing of the blood. So vasodilation of the arterioles, with those tiny blood vessels, the smallest type of arteries, and those ones are going to be connecting to the working muscles. So you want an increase of blood flow, an increase of oxygen to those working muscles, and that's achieved through vasodilation. What is vasodilation then? Yeah, so vasodilation, or widening of the blood vessels. So if they're widened, it makes it easier to send an increased amount of blood carrying oxygen to those working muscles. In order for that to happen, at the same time, vasoconstriction of those arterioles to the non-essential organs has to happen. So for instance, to the kidneys, the liver and the gut. What is vasoconstriction? So vasoconstriction is the narrowing of those blood vessels. So vasodilation, widening, so more blood's going to flow in one direction. Vasoconstriction is the narrowing, so less blood is going to flow to those. Remember, you still need to maintain good blood flow to the brain. Why is that important? Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, you're not going to survive unless you're getting blood and oxygen to the brain. It just helps maintain good functioning of the body and good functioning of the brain. And your brain has to have a good supply of oxygen at all times, even when exercising. But it can cope with limited blood supply to certain non-essential organs like the kidneys, the liver, and the gut, but also to the potentially to the non-working muscles. So if you're doing press-ups and the arms are working really hard, you don't need a huge amount of blood going down towards the legs. Okay, that's the 5 key points that you need to include in that answer. I know vasodilation and vasoconstriction make it up to 6 points, but essentially those two will be combined together. Okay, and that is how vascular shunting is achieved during exercise. Right, what I've done is I've just included a kind of summary of the slides that we went through when we first looked at this. I'm not going to go over all of the information now, but if this was something that you struggled with, then I suggest you just pause the video on each of these slides, go through it carefully, check against the notes that you've got at the moment, and where necessary, just add any extra information in. This is something that we looked at before, but I appreciate it can be maybe a little bit of a tricky topic with all these tricky new terms for us. So now there's one of them. Pause that if you haven't got all of that information detailed already. This was the second one, which details the information about the arterioles, what their role is during exercise. And I've also answered the question there about what happens after exercise. How has this process changed after exercise? So again, worth considering that. And there are the information for you for that one. And then finally, precapillary sphincters. So again, that just shows where they are and the role that they play in this process. And that's just a kind of summary slide. Just shows in some images that connected to this topic. Okay, so like I said, pause it on each of those slides where necessary. Make sure that you've got all that information down in good notes, and that most importantly, you obviously understand it all before we move on. Right. So to today's lesson, and again, this is just a follow-up really on the PNF lesson that we did last time. What is PNF? Yeah, it says it on the screen, but it's worth practicing saying it just so you get used to it. It sounds really complicated, but it's a really good topic to get your head around, and a good set of keywords there that you need to just be able to recall and make sure that you can then use them effectively in exam questions. So proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Worth saying it a few times there. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but make sure that you're familiar with that. And I've kept the same key terms as we had before, because this is specifically looking at the LMQ that we're going to have to answer. So it's a 15-mark question and not an uncommon question that you might be faced with in the exam. So it's all good having the basic content knowledge, but can we apply that to the much more bigger, more challenging level marks questions in the exam? That's what we're looking at today. Now, at the end of last lesson, I asked you to do a little bit of independent research, looking at the advantages and disadvantages of PNF. That's going to be crucial for us in accessing the marks in the higher level part of the question where you're having to evaluate. Okay, so hopefully you've got some good notes on that already, and that should stand you in good stead as we move forward. If not, can I suggest that you just pause the video here, go away, spend a little bit of time, I would say 20 minutes to half an hour, of trying to just look for a range of advantages and disadvantages of using PNF. Obviously, it has its benefits, but there could be some negative side, or not necessarily negative side effects, but downsides of using them. Okay, so this is the question that we're faced with. I'll just read it through to you so you're nice and clear with it. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF, is a specialist training method used by a range of athletes. Explain the role of proprioceptors in PNF and evaluate its effectiveness as a specialist training method using sporting examples in your answer. And as always with these types of questions, it's very much advised that you put a plan together. And my suggestion last lesson was to approach it like this. Initially bug the question. So if you can remember what each of those letters means. So the B is for boxing the command words. The U is for underlining like the key terminology. and then the G is just going back over it. Go back over it before you actually answer the question, but then go back after it. Go back over it again once you've actually answered the question to make sure that you've included all the information that's required. Okay, so in your plan, there's 3 key aspects. Before we do that, we're going to bug the question. So it doesn't matter if it's ever so slightly different, but kind of the main features of this process should be fairly similar. So bug in the question. B, box in the command words. So first part is just kind of context information. Explain is definitely one of the words that we want to be looking at, and evaluate would be the other one. And whilst it's not necessarily a command word, I'm also just going to box this just to remind myself that I need to use sport and examples in my answer. Okay, then in terms of underlining key terms, well, straight up, that's definitely something that I want to be commenting on, and explaining the role of proprioceptors. That's definitely something that I want to be commenting on. And the fact I think that also I need to make sure that I'm commenting on a range of athletes. Okay, so it's not just giving one example. Right, so that's the underlining done. You should have something like that. And then the going over it is worth just reading through the question again, checking how many marks it's worth, and then that should set you up nicely for the plan. Okay, so in terms of your plan, something like this is what you should have put together. Again, it doesn't matter if it's slightly different, but it's worth investing, a minute or 2 of your time in the exam to make sure that you know what it is that you're going to be writing about moving forward. So first part, AO1, is to do with knowledge, and this tends to be your knowledge of the content that you've underlined in the question. So worth doing it in order, makes sense. So PNF was the first thing that you'd underlined. What is it? Give a definition and then give a basic description of what it is. And then the other thing was the proprioceptors. And in terms of this, whether you write all of this down or whether you just know that this is something that you're going to need to comment on, identify what proprioceptors are. And then there's kind of 3 extra parts to the kind of description aspect. Where are they found? What do they do? And when do they do it? So that's all crucial information, and that's all enables you to get the first set of marks in AO1. Second part, I've gone with obviously sport and examples. So AO2, we know this is about how to apply the information here to these sport and examples. So, and what the particular benefits might be in each of those examples. Obviously, there's a bit more detail that you could go into there. It might be worth scribbling down some of the examples that you're thinking that you might give. So we know that PNF is to do with increasing range of movement, range of motion at a joint, improving flexibility. So I'm going to be thinking, what sport and examples can I think of there? What sports require good flexibility? And you might want to just jot down things like gymnastics. It's probably going to be something. I definitely need a good range of movement in things like swimming. And then maybe even in team games, so possibly things like tennis, possibly things like football, but a range of sports. Okay, and then finally my evaluation. So evaluations are all about making judgments on things. What are the positives? What are the pros? How's it going to actually impact overall on my performance? And what are the cons? So what are maybe the drawbacks or the downsides of using this as a specialist method of training? How's it going to impact on my performance? But what other things do I need to consider? Okay, is it good for everyone? Are there some other factors that I need to consider before deciding whether this is something that I should be using? So what I'd like you to do now is make sure that your plan is reflective of something like this, and then have a first go at answering the question. So pause the video here. You can use your notes from the lesson previously if you need to, but what I want you to do is have a go at actually putting a full answer together. Give yourself, at least 15 minutes to do that. It may take you slightly longer, and at this stage I'm not fussed if you need to spend 20 minutes or so on it. In the exam, obviously you're going to be under some time pressure, and it's going to be important that we don't waste too much time, but essentially for now it's about understanding the structure and how to put your quality answer together. So yeah, 15 minutes, pause the video to here and give it a go. Sorry, this section up here just gives you the breakdown of where the marks roughly are coming from. So 4 marks available for AO1, 5 marks for AO2, 6 marks for AO3, so 15 marks in total. Right, this then just goes through some tips for each section. So you can use this as a bit of a guide to compare to your answer. Now, I haven't written out the answers or the content in full, because what I want you to do is use this to adapt and edit your work, potentially redrafting it at the end of it. Okay, so in terms of knowledge, 4 marks available. So PNF stretching. So like I said before, some sort of definition. PNF stretching is, and then you go into your definition. PNF stretching involves, so this is where the description comes in. Remember, there's kind of 3 key parts to what you want to be saying there. Then you're commenting on the proprioceptors. So the proprioceptors involved in PNF stretching are, there's 2 different types of proprioceptors that you should be commenting on. Just identify what they are. Then you go into the detail on each one. Muscle spindles, where are they found? What's their main role? And when in this process of PNF do they actually do their job? Where are they found? What's their main role? When is it that they actually come into play in this whole process? You do the same thing for the Golgi tendon organs. Golgi tendon organs, or GTOs, if you put it in brackets there, then you don't have to write it all out in full, as long as you've got it in brackets after the first time that you use it. Where are they found? What their role is? When do they actually do it? So just go back to your answer now for your first few paragraphs, and remember you should be using good quality English here. Structure it very carefully, use paragraphs, break down the information that you're including so it's not one big chunk. It's better to break it up, just easier to read, and it shows that you've got a good structure for your answer. So use that content now, pause the video here, go back over your answer, and if your answer is not reflective of how these sentence starters have been put together, strongly suggest that you just redraft your answer for this first part in full. Okay, so pause it here and we'll pick it up again in a minute. Okay, the next part is to do with the application, or forming those links. And again, I'm going to go through a series of kind of sentence starters or suggestions on how to do this. It may be that yours is already reflective of this and you can purple pen the good comments that you've made. But if it's not, and if it's not in the same kind of controlled structure, then I'll suggest again redrafting it. So 5 marks available here. PNF stretching can be used to improve performance in, so you give a sporting example, one of your sporting examples. The main one that we initially suggested was to do with gymnastics, so you could use that one. PNF stretching helps to improve or increase, and what's the main fitness component being improved or increased? Yep, so we're looking at flexibility, and then you've got to say why flexibility is important in that sport. So you're forming that link and you're making that application of your knowledge of the training method and showing how it can be used in this particular example. And then what does it actually lead to? Yep, so someone in gymnastics might then be more flexible. What does that allow them to do? What's the process there? And basically you repeat that again because you need to give a range of examples. So PNF stretching would also benefit performers in another sport, for example, swimming, as it would allow them to do, what's it going to enable them to actually do in the sport? What's that going to then lead to in terms of their overall performance? And then ideally a third example. So finally, PNF stretching would also help in, maybe think of it something slightly different, like a teams-based sport, a racket-based sport, something like that. Don't just go to the same sort of examples. And this is because it can help to improve. What's it going to help to improve? What's that going to then mean in terms of their sport and performance? What's it going to lead to? Okay, so what I would do, pause the video here, again, go back through your answer, and if it's not reflective of this, you don't have to use it word for word, but it is important that you follow this sort of structure. And my suggestion would be to redraft your AO2 section, making sure that you've used information across a range of different sports. Pause it here to do that, and then we'll pick it up again in a minute. And finally, your evaluation. So the third section is always essentially where you're going to answer the question. Yeah, if you go straight into this section as your opening part to your answer that PNF stretching is good because, you're not going to get anything. You have to follow that structure. So this is worth 6 marks. So this is what the point of the answer which you really want to get to. But in order to get there, it's like the steps on the ladder. You've got to work your way up. So suggestion of how to do this in sports such as, again, you can give a sport an example. Improved, and we know we're talking about flexibility, range of motion at a joint. What's going to be the impact of that? Yep, so they might be able to do certain moves and things like that you'll have commented on in section 2. What does that then mean in terms of them sort of competing at a high level? Again, this is then where you can start to comment on things that aren't necessarily always good about it. You're not just weighing in with all the positives. You have to think about it now, almost looking at it from the outside. What other comments can you make? So for instance, while PNF stretching is highly recommended technique for improving flexibility, success in most sports will usually require, is sport and performance in a range of sports solely dictated by how flexible someone is? What other things are going to be relevant? Have a think. So there's definitely some comments that you can make there about the importance of other fitness components, giving clear examples. You could even comment on the importance of skills and techniques and tactics, those sorts of things as well. But I would suggest maybe certainly in your opening statement here, commenting on the importance of other fitness components with examples in sports. And then these aren't sentence starters so much, but just suggestions on things that you can comment on. So for example, can you comment on the importance of understanding the techniques and completing it safely? So how that technique is used for PNF. Can anyone do it? Is it something that you can do on your own? Is it something that you would just recommend all sports performers to use? What are the potential risks of doing it? So remember, it's an advanced stretching technique. You're going to be pushing those to stretch those muscles further than they would normally be comfortable stretching. And with that comes potential risk. It has its obvious benefits, and you've outlined those benefits. But can you now just look at it from the other side and comment on some of the potential risks there? Can you make comments about when it's actually used? So in terms of you approaching sport and performance, is it done before? Is it done afterwards? If you're not sure, can I suggest you just go away and research that a little bit, because that's quite an important point here that you need to be able to make. Think about in your normal warm-up, once you've done a pulse raiser, would you think that then is a good time to use PNF stretching? If it's not, think about why that might be. And if you're not going to use it then, when would you do it and why would you do it then instead? So some quite detailed information there that you're going to need to try and include. And then any other comments. So it's not just these things that you can comment on. There are other things as well that are worthy of marks, because this is just essentially based on suggested content. So for example, how long it takes, what are the other alternative methods of training that could be used to improve fitness components, specifically flexibility. What other training methods could be used for that? Have a think. Again, this is the important section. So whilst you may think that your first and your second section are reasonably close to the mark in terms of what is down here as suggestions, I would strongly urge you to redraft this section as a whole and make sure that you're very clear on on each of these points, because this is where the depth of your answer comes in. This is where you're going to pick up those big marks. So pause it here go through each of these carefully, have a real think about it. Where necessary, go away and do a little bit of research on these things so you can really show that you've got a good understanding of it. Okay, and before we look at the mark scheme, give yourself sort of another 5 or 10 minutes just to go back through your whole answer, checking against the previous slides and making sure that you've got good coverage of all that content. Okay, so this isn't a mark scheme. This is a kind of an outline of possible content. I'm not going to read it all through, but what I do urge you to do is read it through carefully, check it against your answer, look at the language that's used, look at the key terminology, look at the structure of the sentences. This is the sort of thing that you need to try and reflect in your own work. So for the first one, there's a clear definition and a description of it. Clearly identified the different proprioceptors, and then for each of the proprioceptors, you've gone into a little bit more detail, saying maybe where they're found, what they do, and when do they do it in terms of this whole process. You then come on to the second part, and this is the possible content for the second part, so the application. So they've gone with gymnastics, they've gone with swimming, sprinting, and then football, rugby, lots of different examples, a range of examples. And this is the key thing with this. One of the things to bear in mind here is that they've commented on not just the improvement in flexibility and then directly to performance levels, but also how PNF can be used as a method of preventing injury, which is a crucial comment that you can make. It's slightly different to the other things, shows a wider thinking, and definitely going to get you some marks there. So go through that carefully. Where necessary, add bits into your answer, and if your answer doesn't reflect sort of quality of comment there, then redraft. And then finally, the big section, AO3, what you need to be looking at here is a clear evaluation. So an evaluation is a balanced judgment, going into a little bit more detail about some of the benefits, but then also looking at it and thinking, what other factors do I need to show understanding of here that are going to help me judge whether this is a suitable method of training or how appropriate it is as a method of training. Okay, so go through each of those carefully, make sure that you've got each of those points down in your own answer. And the one that I was saying before, that maybe you need to be thinking about is this last one, in terms of when it can be used. The rest of it is kind of detailed information, fact that you might need a partner, fact that you need to be aware of some of the precautions and some of the risks involved. But this last section is important because it just tells you a little bit of information about when it might be suitable to use this as a method of training. Okay, go through it carefully, make sure that you've got a good quality answer at the end of it, highlighting AO1, AO2 and AO3 in your answer, and hopefully this is a topic that you will now feel confident on as we move forward. Right, in case that hasn't quite taken up all of your time for today's lesson, I'm just going to give you a couple of other bits that I want you to look at. Okay, so across the neuromuscular system, there are three kind of key bits of work that we looked at. The first one was to do with muscle fibers. So muscle fibers, these were the key questions. I'm not going to go through them all, but these were the learning checklist at the end of our muscle fiber lesson. Go through them, make sure that not only have you got good notes on them, but that you actually understand them in full. If not, go back over the lesson, look for the video on muscle fibers, and make sure that you've got a good set of notes that can help improve your understanding. Same thing with the second lesson on recruiting muscle fibers. So if you were asked any of these questions, can you confidently give an answer? Again, look back through the video if you're not sure about it. It's not just about having the notes, but it's about actually being able to recall that information straight away. You need to learn it, not just have notes on it. And then the final one was to do with PNF. So we've just looked at it there. So hopefully this is fresh in your head. There's a set of questions there that you need to look through. And again, if it's something that you're not confident on, make sure you go through it carefully. Finally, just as a teeing up for the next set of work that we're going to do on the musculoskeletal system, hopefully this is not something that's going to prove too challenging for you, but can you make sure that you're very confident in recalling the name and location of key bones in the body, and that you're also aware of the different joints in the body? We're particularly going to be focusing on the ball and socket and the hinge joints. So if that's something that you're not got a good understanding of, can I urge you to do some research on that, look for some information online, look at some videos on the A-level PE sections that I've recommended on YouTube, and that should put you in a good position to move forward with our next topic. Okay, guys, all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.